everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Magical Jill, and today we are talking about Pokemon and Palworld again.
Yay! We were very shocked and surprised that last video did so well on it. A lot of new people on our channel, so we appreciate that.
Yay, welcome!
We are going to be doing more Pokemon stuff, and I'm sure some Palworld stuff too. We're big fans of like the old Pokemon stuff. So like we've been going back and watching the anime. We put up a new video about our first time, or your first time, watching that like just last week. So if you're interested, check it out.
But before we enter this video, I did want to mention, after this whole lawsuit thing, I've actually been seeing people say pirating Nintendo games is now morally okay. And my question of the day for you is, what do you think about that? Do you think that people should be pirating Nintendo games?
Well, I think that's a fair question of like, when is it okay?
Yeah.
You know, like I look at old Pokemon games and I always bring up Pokemon Emerald. You want a new battery on that thing? Like $250 game. Mm-hmm. Nintendo does not see a penny of that. It's not available on any distribution service to buy. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what are they getting out of that? I don't know. It's an interesting question. But today we're taking a look at that lawsuit again because a little over a week ago, I think like 9 days-ish ago, it kind of came out from Palworld that they had to remove features over this.
I know, and it's been very interesting so far.
And there's a new piece of news past that, because we weren't going to talk about that. We were kind of like, yeah, this figures. But there's a new piece of evidence that could actually flip everything in their favor in terms of like them having a pre-established right to use this mechanic because of prior art.
So many of us know the patents that Nintendo filed, they either filed after Palworld was coming out or after Palworld was already announced to be a game. Mm-hmm. And it kind of seemed like they filed them out of fear. But one thing that's really interesting is they filed one specific patent, the one for gliding, and we'll show what it says here for that. It's a very specific patent about like smoothly changing to mounts to be able to glide on them.
And riding objects in a game, essentially.
Yes, and basically they filed that patent, the parent patent of it, 6 months after the original footage of Palworld showing their like new gameplay of that like came out at the Indie Live Expo in 2021.
Yeah, so this is interesting because essentially this is broken down by different places like Windows Central, but there's multiple sources we will have in the description down below if you want to read them yourself. We are not copyright and patent experts, okay? We are gamers, fans of anime, amateur writers. These are the things that we are. So when we take a look at this, we're taking a look at it from the same point of view that you guys are. The fact that it did get unearthed that parent patent was from 2021, meaning that they filed this other patent, their 2024 claim, essentially, or it's not a patent, it's like a claim that they can point back to their parent patent and say, look, back in 2021, we had this patent, right? Like we filed for this. Mm-hmm. But then also, these patents have not gone through in the US.
No, but they did file recently to have them go through in the US, which kind of goes to show that people are thinking they're going to take this lawsuit all the way to the United States. And as somebody who lives in the United States myself, I know a fair share about how the court systems work. Obviously, I'm not an expert, I'm not a lawyer, but I do know how some things work in my own country. From what I have seen and the way I know the court systems work here in America, I don't think Nintendo would win on our soil. Maybe they have a chance in Japan. I do not think they could win this in the United States. And I would like Jay to tell you why.
Well, prior art is really pushed in the United States.
It is very pushed.
First off. And secondly, you have to be really specific to patent game mechanic here. Like, for example, you know the Nemesis system that they did with WB for like Shadow of Mordor and stuff?
Yeah.
Like, everybody was very upset about that, and I'm upset about that it belongs to a company that doesn't want to use it. However, Assassin's Creed was able to come in and do a very similar system. Mm-hmm. You know, I believe it was called the Mercenary system. Mm-hmm. They just tweaked a couple of different things. It's not the same lines of code, obviously, but it does mostly a similar thing. Basically, my point is, I think you could still create that system if it wasn't just a one-for-one, right?
Yes.
And so when it comes to the United States, they're more specific on that. And part of it is because the U.S. has been subject to basically a thing called patent trolling forever. So the idea is that I am daddy's little good boy. No, not in the naughty way, but in the way of like,
Ooh.
I am given a bunch of money from my dad or something and I don't want to work and I'm straight out of an Ivy League school. So what I do, because I'm lazy, is I go and spend thousands of dollars buying up patents and trying to buy up copyrights and trademarks for things I'm not going to use, and then I leverage those against other art and ideas that come out. Well, the United States people are getting tired of that happening. Mm-hmm. And so like when you are in video game development, you have to be pretty specific now to file a patent. Like it can't be this vague. You know,
and these are very vague, in my opinion, the patents. And I'll show a couple of them on screen.
They're allowed to go through in Japan because Nintendo has very big points with helping the Japanese economy.
Yes, they have very big pull in their system.
You're less likely to have something happen to you. Mm-hmm. Police officers' wives, they don't get speeding tickets very often, do they? And so this is something that happens in the court system around the world, is if you have a foot in the door with that country, you have some favor built up, you're more likely to get things floated by, and Nintendo's been in that position for a very long time, but they're not in that position in America at all.
No, they are not. They're not.
Like, they're popular here, but they're not, like, the government does not care about them.
No.
Whereas the Japanese government does care about Nintendo, and I would argue probably does not care much about Pocketpair.
I did want to mention Pocketpair had to spend resources changing parts of their game, otherwise they wouldn't be allowed to distribute it anymore, and other things that they didn't fully get into in this tweet. But they basically said that on November 30th they released a patch. They had to remove abilities for like summoning pals by throwing pal spheres and change things for the glider system so that now you have to have a glider in your inventory. You can't use your pals for it anymore. And they said that the reason they did this is because the changes are necessary in order to prevent further disruptions to the development of Palworld.
And other games. They said, you know, that it was affecting other games that they were working on, because they don't only do Palworld.
Yes, and so they've not been able to do as many updates as they'd like for their other games that they have. They've had to focus a lot of resources on changing things to be able to have their game actually be able to be played by people during this lawsuit. And it's just ridiculous. I kind of feel like I feel like that game should be left the way it is and in limbo until the lawsuit actually comes out with something substantial, in my opinion.
One issue, though, is it's not allowed to be left in limbo, because the way that the distribution worked, it was going to halt them being able to sell the game.
Yeah.
You know, I want to make another video talking about why this lawsuit matters so much, but some people, I think, who are fans of Nintendo and Pokemon, when we talk about this, they think that what we're doing is being haters. They think we're saying we don't like Pokemon, you know, we want Pokemon to fail. I actually think Pokemon losing this lawsuit would be better for Nintendo and Pokemon, because it would force more innovation. It
would force them to do a lot more creativity on their terms.
And optimization of their game. And my thing is that if you have to compete with someone and your first inclination is, I don't want to do that, instead I'm going to go to court and beat you because I have more money than you.
Yeah, let's get rid of the competition instead of fighting against them.
That's telling me that you're out of good ideas, that you're out of passion, and that you're now just making these things just to make money only, not because it's a good piece of art and you want to make money. And so that to me is why I think, and we can talk about that in our video in the future more in depth, but to me, I'm looking at Pokemon's decline in like its ability to run well. I think in a lot of Pokemon designs being less creative, all these different things, right? And they see another game coming out that's a competitor in a way, that's like possibly drawing people away from their game. And instead of competing, they get mad and they do this. But I pointed out before, they took other ideas from a lot of different things. They took ideas of temporary evolution, which were obviously made popular by Digimon, which was a Pokemon competitor. And they just straight up used it for Mega Evolution. Now, I can't argue that they stole it, but it's weird timing that it was a big thing that set apart Digimon, sorry, I'm saying it weird. And then they said, oh, let's do that too. But when anybody else comes in and sees something Pokemon's doing, whether it's similar to their designs of characters, their art style, mechanics, if someone comes in and sees what Pokemon's doing and says, let's do that too, Pokemon says, hey, you can't do that.
Yeah,
But it's okay when they do that.
Even if they did it first, like with this case with Palworld, where they They did the glider thing 6 months before Nintendo ever filed a patent, and before Scarlet and Violet ever came out, where they started using said mechanic in their game. To me, they were in the process of developing Miraiden and Koraiden to be able to glide and do things like swim, and just do this all very seamlessly. And then they got mad that somebody had that idea first. Mm-hmm. And they were like, crap, what do we do now?
Take it to court.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to me, that means that you don't want to compete.
Yeah.
Which to me is like, if you're going to operate a business in capitalist settings, like, you know, what they're trying to do with this in Japan and what they're trying to do with this in the States and in Europe, you can't be anti-capitalist and do that. And that is anti-capitalism, is to refuse to compete and instead drag your opponent to court to try to beat them with money.
Mm-hmm.
That's not competition.
Mm-hmm.
That's abuse of the court system.
No, it is abuse of the court system. And I think that the US would definitely call it that too.
Well, and that's why I think a lot of people are on Palworld's side. That's why I think this new information is so important, because this essentially is showing, like you said, that they did already have this idea. And people have pointed out prior work with things like Craftopia, where they already had some of these different things as well. Mm-hmm. You know, in a prior piece of art long before this, before Palworld was even made. And
other games that aren't even by Pocketpair that had similar, if not the same idea in different things. One thing that they point back to is Ark Survival Evolved. And it has these similar game mechanics in it that are being patented by Nintendo. But because that's not a Pokemon adjacent type thing, they don't have to worry about that, so they're not going to sue them.
Yeah, it's so weird to me too, because like, Palworld is also kind of a shooter. It's got a lot of shooter mechanics, which Pokemon doesn't have at all, right?
Well, maybe Activision should sue them.
yeah, don't use guns. Well, that's my thing though, is like, I would think that kind of stuff sets it far enough apart from Pokemon that it's already a totally different gameplay loop. We'll talk more about this in the future, I'm sure. I really, really do think that if they drag this to the US, it's not going to be a good thing. And also, I think that if they win this, it's bad for everybody. I will stand by the fact that I think being able to patent a game mechanic is bad in general.
It's bad for the gaming industry and bad for creativity.
The only time that I can see it being good is if you're an indie dev and you make a mechanic and then like Activision or someone comes along and takes it. But, like, that's so situational.
And not something that happens all the time.
No, I often see it the other way. I see a big company go after a smaller one.
Yes.
Like, this is supposed to be designed to help smaller companies. Like, it was supposed to protect innovation, and instead, I believe that it's gotten to a point with these companies where it's used to stifle it, and really...
abuse indie developers.
The idea almost needs to be done away with, of patenting game mechanics, because it's gotten to the point where it's abusive, both of the copyright system, the patent system, and of developers who now have to look over their shoulders. Like, we've wanted to make indie games. You know, you and I have talked about it. We're gonna have to, vet every country in the world? It is impossible unless you're a huge company, and that is an unfair standard to set for game development.
So I hope you all really enjoyed this video. If you didn't see my first video on this subject, you should definitely go check it out.
It was actually like your second video, I think.
Oh.
We covered this once a long time ago, just in brief.
Yeah, well, we'll show that on the little end screen right there. And I hope you check out some of my other Pokemon videos. I do Sailor Moon, I do Dragon Ball. I do just basically anime stuff on this channel, and it's very fun. So I hope you guys enjoy it. And also, I have an awesome shop called CosmoBunny.shop. Yay! And I use recycled comic books and recycled manga and recycled stickers and just basically things that I find that are damaged, that are being thrown out at my local stores. And I turn them into art so they don't land in landfills.
And what code can people use for 10% off their first order, Jill?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, right now my code is Sailor in all caps because I do a lot of Sailor Moon on this channel, so I hope you guys check that out. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye!
Bye!